I'm Mike Johns. Some people call me Michael. Some people call me Mike. I like to say, my friends, my good friends call me Mikey. I try to stop that now, but my friends call me Mike. My acquaintances call me Michael. And everybody else can call me Dean Johns or Vice President Johns. So your choice. I like that approach because it has a little humor to it right from the beginning, and it tells people, you want to be my friend, call me Mike. And generally that is a good starting point in life, is getting people to call you Mike, and start out working on their level no matter who they are, whether it's the housekeeper or the president of the university, the chief of surgery, whatever. I think it's just, setting a playing field that's pretty level, because we're all people, we're all humans, and we all contribute in some way. That's sort of a reflection somewhat of growing up in the way I grew up and the circumstances within which I grew up. And I might start with that kind of a statement and then say from there, life is all about experiences and mentors. I think people that you have respect for, who give you guidance and advice over time and over years. People talk about you have to have a mentor. No, you have to have mentors, and they change over time in life. I would say when I look back, my first obvious mentors were my mom and my dad. And I grew up in Detroit, in the city, and I mean in the city. They were working class people. Dad was sort of the janitor and maintenance man at the Catholic Church, which was nearby, and mom was the homekeeper. 5 kids, and so you kind of learn how to survive when there are 5 of you. I was the oldest, so the rules always would be, well, when your brother Fred is old enough, then you can do that. I kept saying, well, that doesn't make any sense, because obviously he's going to be younger than me all the time. Well, that was it. There were rules in our family, and that was probably the earliest lesson I learned, is that there are rules, and you got to live by the rules, or else there are consequences. And back in those days, there were consequences that stung a little bit, but not bad. So we learned how to follow rules. And mom had rules like, when you come home from school, you hit the books, get your homework done first, then you can go out and play. And I always kind of have lived that. You do your homework before you play, whatever homework means to you at your stage of life. You get the work done, and then you go out and play. Play is part of life. It's an important part of the combination of work and play, and you need to have both. Having rules as a child growing up, there's another lesson from rules when Dad has rules, is that, we found there were workarounds. And particularly with 5 kids, we could figure out workarounds. And I don't mean to say we broke the law, but people make rules, and they're not perfect, and sometimes the rules get in the way of progress, and you have to kind of figure out, how do you get around that without getting into a lot of trouble? And I kind of think about that sometimes over the years of my career, that you need to have workarounds. You need to find solutions, basically, to problems. And that's one part of, I think, being successful as a leader, is you've got to like problems. If you don't like problems, don't even bother, because that's all you get when you're a leader. Whatever it is, whatever level, people bring you a problem, and you're supposed to fix it or solve it. And so that's something that you learn early. I learned early in life, rules, workarounds, and problems need to be fixed. The other was hard work. That's the lesson I got from my mother early on, was, as she would say, hard work don't kill no one. And so we all had jobs early on, whether it was doing newspapers. As soon as you could get a newspaper route, she'd come home and say, I've got you a job. And we'd say, where? And that was the way life was. So the hard work that goes along with all this was sort of natural growing up. And was sort of ingrained from the beginning. And I think most people probably accept that, I guess, that to succeed, you've got to work hard. The other part was getting educated. Neither of my parents had a college education. They're high school grads. But they had recognized the value of that education. And so they sent us to these little Catholic schools. Of course, that's where my father worked, at the Catholic school. And we had nuns, and these are the old days. We really had nuns, and they had rules too. And or you kind of got a little whack somewhere, and it's interesting actually because those whacks never hurt you really, but they kind of got your attention, right? And so, but we learned some discipline there as well from the nuns about study and school and whatnot, and there's this sort of importance that if you work hard and study, you'll get good grades, and that was part of the competitive spirit. And when you grow up with 5 kids, you're competing for everything, whether it's who's going to get the last piece of chocolate, which was never me because I don't like chocolate, but the other 4 were grateful that I didn't, or the last apple or whatever. So competition was part of all this too, learning that competition is part of life, and competing is okay. And so we competed in sports as little kids. I even played football until I got in the 8th grade, and now I'm about 110 pounds and must have been all of whatever 5'4", and I was playing in the backfield, but the linemen were these big kids who had grown fast, and by the 9th grade I said this is a bad idea and gave that up, and I thought I'd focus on baseball and basketball, but then I didn't grow really tall, so I bagged all that and played baseball. But it's part of the competition, and learning how to play sport and the rules of sport too. And it gets back to, I think, the importance of rules and understanding what the rules are. So it was kind of a good childhood in that sense, in that, we didn't know what we didn't have, and what we had was enough, and we had a lot of friends on the street, and there was a neighborhood, and families were there, and it was kind of a mixed neighborhood, but the families took care of each other and took care of the kids, made sure we didn't get in trouble. So it was a good environment. It wasn't a wealthy environment. The nice thing about those days, you didn't know what you didn't have. There was the radio you'd listen to, the Lone Ranger and whatnot on the radio, and and eventually we had these little TVs that had circles, and you just watch the news, but you didn't know what you didn't know, and you didn't know what you didn't have. And that was a good thing, because then you just focus on enjoying all the things of life that are actually truly enjoyable. The sunshine, the rain, the neighbors, the friends. That's what, when you come right down to it, is the most important thing. Much more important than collecting things. Although I do like things too. I guess we all learn to do that. But it's this growing up had an impact on me, and in that sense, and I was shaped. I guess we're plastic and malleable in those early years, and how you're shaped, how you're impacted by the environment, your parents, the love you get, the discipline you get, and the education you get has a huge impact in shaping where you'll go and who you'll be. So that was all good stuff. When I was in the 7th grade, as I said, my father was working as the janitor at St. Cecilia School there in Detroit, and the Monsignor said to my father, which of your boys is going to be a priest? Being the oldest, he pointed at me. He said, well, Michael do that. Of course, I was 7th grade, and it looked like a pretty good deal. He lived in this really nice home attached to the church. Somebody answered the door for him, if you knocked. My mother cooked over there for them, and it looked like a good life. He even drove a nice car. I thought, wow, yeah, I'll do that. So yeah, in the 9th grade, they shipped me off to a seminary, and it was great because I got this, great ethical grounding, lots of discipline again. You don't talk in the hallways and all the rules. You get demerits, you get to too many of them, you get to scrub the floors. Only happened to me once, I learned. But the education was great. And so it was kind of, wow, I got suddenly this education. And I'm with classes with kids from all over the city of Detroit. I had no clue that if you lived in Grosse Pointe, you lived differently than if you lived down in the city. But I learned that by the time I was graduating from high school. But the big thing was, as I was going through high school, I suddenly got, as I got a little older, suddenly realized that my interest in biology really exceeded my interest in celibacy. So I decided I'd probably have to separate from the seminary, and that was the next change in my life when I decided that I wasn't going to continue on and be a priest. Then it was a trip to college. The local Local school there, Wayne State University, was right there in downtown Detroit. It was affordable. I could work and pay the tuition, so I worked through school. And it was right there. It was a good education. I had a lot of fun. But I made one big mistake, big error I made as a second-year college student, first semester. I joined a fraternity. Now, the fraternity wasn't the mistake. The mistake was that having fun and not paying attention to school was a mistake. Going to class kind of sometimes got away in the way of fun and whatnot. So I didn't have a really good semester. I decided to be pre-med by then. I started out actually, just stepping back a little bit, not going to be a priest. I decided, well, I'll be a pharmacist. And that was based on this profound enlightenment I had, because down the street on the corner was a drugstore where you could sit in a stool and get a cherry Coke, and the guy who owned it was the pharmacist. And he looked like he did pretty good and was having fun. So I said, I'll do that. But then when I got to college and I was taking all these science courses, and there were a bunch of kids who said they were going to be doctors. I said, that sounds pretty good. And we had a doctor who saw us in his basement level of his house. That's really old days. He was a family practice doc. And I thought, well, that'd be good. That might even be better. So I'll be a doctor. Well, I had no clue what I was doing. No clue. There were no doctors in our family, no college graduates in our family. So just, one thing to another. So I started taking all those pre-med courses in the first year, and I was doing okay. That second year, man, I really bombed out. That was a big failure. And I had like a 1.6 grade GPA that semester. And at the end of the semester, when I got grade report came in, I said, wow. I said, I'm not paying attention. And if I want to succeed, I'm going to have to get back to those basic principles that I had learned from my parents, from those nuns, from the priests in the seminary, that, you got to work at your studies and you got to succeed and do well if you want to be successful. They taught that to me. So I buckled down then and kind of corrected myself, got forward. So it was another sort of repeat of some of those same lessons from, kind of failing, from doing badly. And but the good news was I recognized that after one semester, woke up and started going to classes, reading the books, doing what you need to do. And so that understanding hard work started to pay off with really good grades. But again, when I applied to medical school, because of that one bad semester, my GPA was too low, and I never could get into that medical school after 3 years of college. So I went to grad school. But I continued on, and I applied again, and the University of Michigan let me in. So I'm forever grateful to the University of Michigan for accepting this dumb kid from Detroit with a 1.6 in the first semester of the second year and a GPA that was okay. And that was kind of interesting, because then suddenly I'm thrust out. I'm living away from home now for the first time at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and surrounded now with all these geniuses and kids from Harvard and Johns Hopkins and Yale and their classmates. And boy, that really scared me. So that means buckle down to work even harder. So, as my mother said, hard work didn't kill anyone, and she was right. And I think looking back, that was one of the important lessons early on in life, that you can do it. Most people have the capacity. They have to apply themselves. And then the other lessons, well, then how do we encourage young people to take full advantage of all their talents and to enjoy life? How do we get at them early enough with that message and help encourage them to success? So those are some of the early lessons I think I took away from growing up, high school, college. In medical school, it was like a whole new world. There it was, again, about mentors and being inspired by people. When I got into the clinical years, it was like going to a candy store. You'd go on to internal medicine, and it was like, wow, these people are so smart, and look how they solve all these difficult medical problems. And you go to the surgeons, and wow, look what they can do to save that person's life, and take that aorta and repair it, and when it ruptured, and the trauma, and it's just like big eyes wide open, and listening to the lectures from the scientists at the University of Michigan, and realizing what they were doing in diabetes research, and Dr. Fyans and Dr. Kahn, who are brilliant scientists and they're clinicians. And I said, gosh, I want to be one of them. And sort of this transformation from a kid growing up in the middle of the city in Detroit who had no clue to suddenly wants to be like Dr. Fyans and Dr. Kahn. And then I met Dr. Ritter. And these people start becoming mentors for you, giving you guidance. And I got a job working in Dr. Ritter's laboratory. And Dr. Ritter happened to be an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. I had no interest in it, really, at the time. And in fact, when I remember looking in the school's book of all the departments, I remember reading this one, and I had taken Latin, a little bit of Greek, and I said, otorhinolaryngology. What the heck is that? Why would you pick that name? I mean, it's too long, too many syllables. And put it down, But then here was Dr. Ritter, who was this just incredibly joyful man, loved to teach, always had jokes and stories, and he called us doctor. And, and so he was like this, sort of pillar of fun, and he always enjoyed everything he was doing, it seemed. Took care of children, pediatric otolaryngology. So he said, would you like to work in my research lab? This was when I was going to be a senior. And I said, yeah, I would. And so I worked in his lab for 6 months on deafness and hearing. And, we would look at the anatomy of guinea pigs who had been exposed to noise and look and see what the damage was done from the noise. And it was kind of early work, nothing that anybody would think was too much today, perhaps. But it was the beginning, everything progresses. And probably the scariest little job I had was when people were put no code, which meant they weren't to be resuscitated. These days they'd be in the hospital at that time. I was sent up to do their hearing test on them and see if they would sign that they would donate their temporal bones to science. And then my job would be, when they died and they had their postmortem, I would go out and harvest, that's a nice word to say it, harvest the temporal bones and bring them up to the laboratory. Then I would preserve them properly, then drill out so just you could see the cochlea, and then we'd study these temporal bones of these people who had died with hearing losses. But that gave me the bug and more for research, and Dr. Ritter, with his enthusiasm and love of what he did, I thought, I think I'll be an otolaryngologist. And I think that's another lesson and he became a great mentor. I'd babysit his kids, but he'd give me advice and things of that nature. And to have that kind of a mentor who could give you guidance. He was always teacher of the year at the medical school, and you could see why. He was the prefect of the Honor Society that I happened to be in, and you looked up to a person like that. And there are a lot of smart people, but a lot of them don't have those traits, that sort of infectious enthusiasm for what they do that you see. And that stuck with me forever. I think that you got to love what you do and enjoy what you do. So, choose carefully. Choose carefully something that you really think you're going to enjoy for life, whatever it is, and then make it joyful, and then use your best to, inspire others around you. And it's about inspiration, and that's one of the key traits of a leader, I think, is the ability to inspire. So, more lessons learned from people, and as I did my residency there, then it was about 6 years. I did research and learned how to become a head and neck surgeon. And I learned a lot from that experience as well. Learned, because I continued on in research, learned how to care for patients properly, had these great role models of physicians who, sat down when they talked to the patient, looked him eye to eye, not looking down, looked at him. Sometimes would hold their hand or pat them on the shoulder and encourage them and give them a positive sense of things will be okay. And I learned that the patient has to believe that they can achieve and they can beat their disease just as much as I do, because their emotional status and their belief is just as important to their recovery as it is for me, more important than it is for me. And so I learned that from doctors I was working with. It was truly exciting. And I had more mentors. My department chair was sort of this stern man who was loved by everybody. He would send us little messages that would say, Mike, see me, WPW. You never wanted one of those in your mailbox. Because it usually meant you did something wrong or he had a job for you. For me, more than likely, because I tried not to do things wrong, it would be another job. Go research this for me, that kind of thing. But he was great. And the lesson I learned from him was a great one. As I was leaving, he wanted me to stay and be on the faculty, but it was Vietnam and we were all going in after our residency, and he wrote letters trying to get me out because the war was sort of coming to an end. But they kept me, and I ended up at Walter Reed with a good story about that after. But I'll never forget, as I was leaving, he said to me, "Now, Mike," he said, "when you go to look for your permanent job after you leave the military, so just remember this. It's not where you work, it's who you work for." And I've never forgotten that. Who do you work for? That's the most important thing. What is that? And if you're working for a person, my next job would be a department chair or whatever that I was going to work for, or a dean. What do I think of that person? Are they interested in my success, or are they just interested in their own success? How do they see the world? But that was a great lesson. It's not where you work, it's who you work for. I'll never forget it. And I've passed that on to people over and over again. So I will repeat that here because I think it's an important one, and it's paid off in so many ways. Now, the military experience was terrific. I really enjoyed it. I had no clue. I'm a kid who grew up in Detroit, had no real life experiences. We didn't travel much except around Detroit and Michigan. And so here I am. Oh, by the way, I did get married in medical school. Yeah, I got to come back to that story. I can't leave that out. That was exciting. I had a cousin who lived across the street from this nice family, the Del Campo family. And when I left the seminary, because my interest in biology exceeded my interest in celibacy, my cousin pointed out that there was this really nice girl across the street that I should meet. So she introduced me, and I had my first date with my wife. So we go way back, as she says, way too far back. She doesn't recommend it. But Trina was great. She was a math major and in college, which is unusual then, I think. And she went to Michigan State. She had a scholarship, and it was pretty good. She was really smart. Of course, Michigan State was like, when you're up in Ann Arbor, it's like, what? But it was great. So she was terrific. I really learned a lot from her and different points of view. I think the sort of notion of taking a little time to reflect, to think a little bit deeper. I could get real superficial, get it done next. And she would kind of drive down the questions. She was clearly a much better judge of people in a way. I just accepted everybody the way they were, which is useful. But she was more diagnostic into who they were and what they were like. And it was really something I learned from her, is really how to evaluate people much more deeply and more thoughtfully, and pick your friends, for good reasons that were beyond, just superficial reasons. And it was great. It was great being married with her. And we had 2 kids, all of them while we were in medical school, which was the way it used to be, I guess. And she had a job, so she worked and paid our way pretty much through medical school, and I had a part-time job, and she was really, the backbone and strength of our family. And still today is that kind of thoughtful person who, looks at things in a deep way, and emotionally and philosophically. And I'm that more charge ahead, let's do it and get it done now. That other stuff is nice, but I don't have time for that. And so it's good to have that balance in your life, because it brings you back to ground, where you need to be well grounded. And so that's the other part of learning from Trina, is just, to be more attentive to people around you, to understand them, to have that sort of antennae that make you much more self-aware and aware of the situation. And the person walks in the room, you can look at them and see, are they relaxed? Are they tense? Are they upset? And read that without them having to say it. That was important learning lessons from Trina, is being able to see the situation, begin to feel other people's feelings, and be aware of them and pay attention to them. And they become more and more important in leadership as you lead more and more complex adaptive organizations, of understanding these reporting relationships, the people you have, you're counting on them to get things done, and being able to understand or to feel or sense when they just aren't on target, they don't feel right, and be able to help them or to understand them. Another, I think, important trait of a leader is to have enough self-awareness and to have enough awareness of other people and exactly what's their emotional status, how are they feeling about what they're doing. So, at any rate, all those things happened. And I enjoyed my military experience. I learned a lot. It got us out of Michigan for the first time in our lives, and we realized there was a thing called spring. Flowers actually came up in February, not in May. And I remember driving back from Williamsburg with Trina and the two kids, who are now about 5 and 6 or 7. And I think, boy, this is nice. There must be some job we can get somewhere in this area. And called my old boss, who told me it's not where you live, it's who you work for. So anyhow, I started looking for my first academic job. I knew it was going to be in academics. And I had moonlighted in the military. They let me have a half a day to do whatever I wanted, and they said moonlighting was okay. So I moonlighted in a private practice, otolaryngologist's office, and as it was getting near the end of my term in the military, he offered me to join his practice. And I said, no, I don't think that's what I want to do. Then he came back and said, I'll give it to you, because he was going to retire, which is very generous. And I just couldn't see myself doing that. So then I started looking around, and I had heard that this Navy captain from San Diego had retired and was taking the chair at the University of Virginia of otolaryngology, head and neck surgery. And I had met him a few times, and I'd met him because when I took the oral examinations to pass the boards, he was my examiner. And I did pretty good on those boards. I didn't get the 1.6 anymore. I got like the 4.0. And I heard about it through some of my Navy friends, young residents that would come to Walter Reed for a course I was teaching. And so I picked up the phone and I called Dr. Cantrell. And I said, Dr. Cantrell, I hear you're moving to Virginia. Would you be looking for any faculty? And he said, yes. He said, I am, and I was thinking about calling you. I said, well, great. So then I called Dr. Work, who was my old chair. And because I had called him before about somebody out in California and Sacramento and somebody in Iowa and somebody in Pittsburgh, and he would give me, well, it might be okay, or no way, he won't be helping you at all. All he will want is you to help him. And when I mentioned Bob Cantrell, he just said 2 words, take it. That's it, take it. And that was his style, but when he says take it, you do it. I mean, his judgment was, and that was such a payoff. So Bob was such a great mentor. Again, now here's another mentor in my life and a teacher. So I arrive, and he's a Navy captain. He's got all that discipline and everything else, and he's building the small program, and he's going to make it into something great. And what I learned from Bob, amongst many things, is a positive attitude. But the most important thing about being a chair is you got to help the people who report to you succeed. And you want to promote those people and help them to be successful. And he was marvelous at that. I mean, boy, he'd get you appointed to committees nationally. He would use his own position to help you succeed. He'd push you on to get your research lab set up and get it operational and publish the papers. And so he was really all about helping the people in the department do well. And what a lesson I learned, that it's not about you. It's about the people who work for you. If they succeed, you succeed. And a lesson I learned was, it's you got to lead by inspiration, not by intimidation. And 2, that you need to submerge your own ego so that other egos can rise up around you. And that lesson, became important to me as I realized how that works. So when I became a department chairman, I adopted that same attitude. I wanted to be like Bob. I was the chair. I was a professor at Johns Hopkins now. I can't be a professor. I need to help my team become professors. I want our department to be the best in the world. And then I want to recruit some of the best young people to my department to help make that happen. And that's a combination of what I learned in life, whether it's from the nuns of working hard, and my mom and dad working hard and following rules of the military and structure and order, leads to success, from Bob of inspiration, of raising up others around you, and really applied that as a department chair. And that was fun to watch, this department that really had, here at the great Johns Hopkins, had no stature nationally at the time, had zero research dollars coming in, a few people doing some research, not much. The clinical business was solid, but not really exceptional. And turning that around and recruiting in new people, inspiring some of the people who were there to rise up, and then many of them decided it wasn't for them anymore and they left. And that was okay. It was okay because they weren't going to fit the new vision. I remember one of the early things I did after about 3 months, I went and I visited with each faculty member. I told them what I thought a Johns Hopkins faculty in otolaryngology head and neck surgery needed to look like. And that my job was to help them achieve that. And a number of them came up to me and said, Mike, I can't do that and I don't want to do that. I said, fine, what do you want to do? And we'd help them. They'd go, leave, and go find something else to do. And I would then go out and recruit somebody and fill that spot. So it worked for both people. Everybody was happy in the end, and I was really happy. And our department then rose up and became, today it's the #1 department in the country. And that's because we've had a series of leaders there that have made that happen. So that's a succession of leadership is also then a very important part of what we do in our lives. How do we prepare people to be our successor, either there or elsewhere? I listen to people, sometimes I heard this at Emory a fair amount, well, they left. I said, yeah, but what did they leave to do? If they leave to take another leadership position in another institution, that's what we do. We produce leaders for other institutions. That's good. If they depart for that, we are successful. And some of them have a hard time understanding that. They think it's a failure if somebody leaves. And you know how in the military, you rotate all the time anyhow. In fact, you're sort of measured by that next rotation that puts you into a higher position. But, but that was, at Hopkins, it was like that. You want to produce leaders internally. You want to promote them like Bob Cantrell did for his team at Virginia. We would do that at Hopkins, getting people into the committees. Even the nurses, I remember getting the nurses, I told them, look, I want a couple of the nurses who are leading our service, our ward, I said, I want the two of you to get involved with the Society of Head and Neck Nurses. Well, we don't get funding to do that. I said, we'll pay your way. I want you to be there. And so they started going, and after a year, I said, no, I want you guys to be president of this organization. I want you to lead it. And quite frankly, within a few more years, they were. It's just because, you push them, you inspire them, and they're talented people, so they can do it. Give them a few tools and let them turn them loose. And it's fun. Now, everything isn't, peaches and cream. The department was losing money when I went there. So I didn't know anything about the business of medicine in 1984 when I went to Johns Hopkins. I did science, at the time, we called it science. Today you would call it piddling around. But I did science. I loved to teach students. I taught the medical students a lot. I taught the residents. And, I was technically a very good surgeon, at least I like to think so, and had a reputation, people were referring complex cases to me. And so when I went to Hopkins from Virginia, and I looked at the budget, and I thought, whoa, where's the money? They're losing money. How could that be? And I didn't know how you do a bill. I didn't have to worry about it. Bob had that all covered, which is nice, because, as a young faculty, you don't want to worry about any of that stuff. You want to worry about your career. Bob had it covered. So I had to get into that, figure out, okay, what are the problems, and how do we straighten it out? So I had to stop everything and really get into that piece in depth, which I did. And I figured out there were things that needed to change at Johns Hopkins. The billing system was okay. It wasn't great. I found out there was a better billing system. Went to see the dean. Said, I'd like to switch my billing off of your system to this. And he said, well, you can't do that. So you got to be on my system. I left that a little disappointed, saying, gosh, I'm going to be on the crappy billing system. That's a bad idea. But I had to figure that out, do some workarounds. I wanted data. This is back before spreadsheets were just coming out. I wanted data on the productivity of every faculty member. What were we billing? What were we collecting? How much were we writing off? How much was professional courtesy, et cetera. So I could track every faculty member and see how productive they were. I needed data. That's a good scientist. So I might have been the first person there starting to collect data on everybody. Kind of annoyed some of the folks, but it was I made it transparent because I believe in transparency. So I'd show the budget at our faculty meetings, and I'd bring the staff to the faculty meetings too. Here's what it looks like, guys. This ain't good. Got ideas? Then I start showing the breakdowns, and people didn't like so much that they might see their data. I didn't put names on it, but you could see that there's faculty A, B, C, D, E, and you could see who was more productive and who wasn't. So so we started turning things around that way. One of the problems they had what I called was a problem, and that I learned early on at Hopkins was that I had a lawyer patient come in who had something on their vocal cord, and I needed to remove it. And there's a way you do that at the time as microsurgical, and I came out and told my assistant schedule Mr. So-and-so for an outpatient suspension microlaryngoscopy. And the response was, what do you mean outpatient? I said, well, outpatient. They come in the morning, you do it, and they go home. He said, well, we don't do that here at Johns Hopkins. Oh, that was something. I said, well, I promised him as a lawyer. Well, I better go up to the OR and talk to the anesthesiologist about this. We should, because I want to do this at least one. So I talked to the anesthesiologist. And he said, yeah. He said, we need to get started on that. He said, we're a little bit behind on that. I said, well, I promised him we'd do it. I said, don't you think there's a way we could get this done? Well, he said, yeah. He said, we could. He said, but, you better check with the head nurse and see if she's okay with it. Yes, confirmed my opinion. Nurses really are the people that are in charge. And they really are, because they're there all the time, and, the rest are there part of the time. So I saw the head nurse and I explained the problem. And she was sort of sympathetic to this, Dumbo from Virginia who showed up promising patients. And she said, well, okay. She said, let's do it. She said, I know we're going to have to get into this anyhow. I said, so we got a little closet. If you bring him up in the morning, he'll change in the closet. The anesthesia can then put him on a gurney. We'll take him, to get him ready and we'll they can do the anesthesia. You do your case. We'll take him to recovery. Once he's fully recovered, get dressed up, and, you can take him downstairs and his wife can take him home. So we ended up doing the first outpatient surgery at Johns Hopkins in 1984. Well, I thought, this is nuts. I got a lot of these I got to do, and admitting them doesn't make any sense. At the time, Medicare just started what was called DRGs, where they're paying you a lump payment for an admission based on the diagnosis-related groups. So, if you did something in one day, you got the same payment as you did it for 5 days. So why would you want to keep somebody in for 5 days unless they need to be in for 5 days? So I thought, well, what does it cost to spend a night in the hospital? So I have no clue. But I go down and I ask one of the administrators, what's it cost to stay in the hospital? He gives me a number. It has an average number. Nothing to do with reality, but an average number. So I then went up to the OR logs, their paper, and I started going through the OR logs for the past 3 months and picked every case in ENT I thought could be done as an outpatient. Then you just multiply it by the number and say, this is how much money you'd save if you did it as an outpatient. So you get paid without, you don't spend that. So anyhow, then I said, well, that's a pretty good number, but let me go back and do the whole book. So I did generals for everybody's, did the whole OR book and picked how many cases could be done as an outpatient. Multiplied by the number, now it's in the millions. So then I go make an appointment to see the CEO of the health system, who was this really nice guy. They're actually a visionary in healthcare. And it took, 3 or 4 weeks for me to get in to see him. And I went down and I saw Dr. Heisel. And Hopkins had this tradition, the physician was the CEO of the hospitals. And of course, he invited me in his lovely big office, and he's sitting down at his table, his conference table, and he's got a chair, and he's kind of leaning back in his chair. He's a great guy. And he says, sit down. And how are you doing? What do you think about being at Hopkins? Of course, I tell them how wonderful it is. Never been in a place like this, except maybe Michigan. But it was really, really great spot. And I was having a blast. I said, and he's smiling and, of course, loving it. And I said, but I have a problem I could use your help with. He said, what's the problem? I said, well, I said, we can't do outpatient surgery here yet. We're not set up for that. And, we really need to get with that and get that started. And yeah, he said, you're right. He said, it's been on my mind. We need to get that going. And I said, well, just to tell you what I did. So then I tell him what I did, and I count up all these cases and talked to Mr. Halley, and he gave me this number. I multiplied it, I can multiply, and it would save this many millions of dollars a year. And he looks at me and says, you know what? Exactly. His eyes got big. He got excited. He says, we're going to get this done. So I'm going to put you in charge of an ad hoc committee to get this done. I said, oh, Mr. Heisel, Dr. Heisel, I didn't come down here to be in charge of a committee. I just want to get this done. And he said, no. He said, you're going to do it. He said, I'll assign a really good one of our administrators to work with you, and we'll make a committee. And so anyhow, without talking about any of the politics and the people who were pissed off that I would, change something like this, and some of the surgeons said, who would ever want to come in the morning of surgery? They can come in the night before and get a good night's sleep and have the surgery first thing in the morning. I'm thinking, good night's sleep in a hospital? The food, you don't go to the hospital for the food. It's awful. It's a lot better coming on. So anyhow, despite some resistance, it was bound to happen. Had to happen. And so, and yes, there were other people who were mad that I was chairing the committee and they weren't chairing the committee and all that. But, I just managed through that. And we set it up, and I just let all the smart people around me dream it up. And it looked good. And so once we had the plans all in place, the chair of anesthesia, who really wanted to be in charge of all this, but who I, kind of told him, just let's get it done. I said, to him, look, I don't want to run an outpatient surgery unit. I just want to get my patients through it. You can run it. Well, he loved that. Oh, I was going to let him be the boss of it. I was, who wants to do that? So in the end, we had it all set up. And what was a miracle was, in end of that year, Medicare, Medicaid mandated outpatient surgery. It wasn't optional anymore. So it looked like, I was prescient, and so next thing I know, because, I came up with a solution to a problem, got it done. Before we got whacked, we would have had big penalties. The CEO of the health system obviously thought I had some talent, and he starts assigning me to a bunch of committees. So I'm helping him, and I'm down there talking about, look, we got to move more of our practice into the outpatient setting. We need outpatient surgery. We didn't have any of that. We need better outpatient facilities. They need to be more convenient for patients. And so I'm pushing. Now I'm on more committees. And within 2 years, suddenly I get called over to the dean's office. And the dean says to me, Mike, I've been talking with Dr. Heisel, and we think we need to create a position of the associate dean for clinical practice here. And we'd like you to be that dean. I said, well, I'm now, my department's turned around, it's making money. We're recruiting good people. We got research going on. Things are going well, and they want me to do 2 jobs. So I said, well, what's the job that needs to be done? And he lists off 5 things. I said, well, okay, let me think about it, and I'll get back to you. And I said, but would you call and talk to some of the other department chairs, chair of surgery, chair of medicine, and make sure they're comfortable with me in this position? Okay, so I'll do that. You do your part. So I go home and I talk to Trina, and we talk about it. And it's more work. It's going to interfere with, my fun I'm having to some extent. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, somebody's going to come in and do this and has to make these changes and has to run the practice and get it organized for our success. So somebody else could come, they can hire somebody else to come in and do it to me, or I can take the job and do it to myself. And I'm much more comfortable with the latter. If you're going to change it yourself, than have somebody change you. And I thought, well, the 5 things I won't go through them, but they were mostly straightforward. That, I can get this done in a couple of years. Then they can get somebody else to do this job, and life will be good. I had to organize the practice. They were all individual things being done by the departments, mom and pop shops. Wanted to pull it all together into one big organization, et cetera. So within a couple of years, we had a practice organization. There were chairs of the departments who were resistant, but I would go out and say, look, if we can offer you a better product for a better price and get better collections, would you sign up for it? Oh, sure, but you're not going to achieve that. I said, well, if we do, would you? Sure. And one of them was so resistant. I said, well, you'll be the last, and if you don't have to. And of course, the fun part was getting to the last. Showed him all the data. He said, put me on it, And these were friends. These people really were friends because they were my colleagues, department chairs. But I have a small department, and some of these people have massive departments with 400 or 500 faculty, and I've got 20. So it was kind of an experience. So after 3 years of this, it's all in order, and I'm working in the dean's office, running back and forth to my department. I told the dean, it's time for you to get somebody to do this job, and so I can get back to running my department. And that's when the dean told me he was going to retire. And that would I continue until the next dean came on, the next dean could appoint. And this dean was great. I learned a lot from him over those 3 years. I learned about the research enterprise, because now I was on the inside of the medical school administratively. And I started learning about research administration, not how to do it, but from the colleagues. I started learning about the nuts and bolts of our research operation, planning for research space, the idea to bring on new buildings and research, hearing about medical education, how we were doing, would we reshape our educational programs, et cetera. The resistance to these things, because now I'm sort of seeing it from another perspective. And it was kind of enjoyable, but I was ready to get back to running the department. And so I hung on there. The dean announced his retirement. They do a search, and the next thing I know, I'm the next dean, not really looking for that job. And that's the other thing, another sort of lesson. One lesson from this story, of course, is you got to be a problem solver. But when you see a problem, you don't whine about it. That's what I see mostly. People whine, complain, whine and complain. They don't bring solutions. And I tell people, since I've been in leadership positions, I know we've got problems. Identify the problems and bring me a solution. If you're just going to come up and whine about the problem, don't even bother, because I'm going to throw you out of my office. I'm not going to listen to that. I don't need to listen to that. I know we got problems. Bring me solutions. And I like solutions from the ground floor, because they're right there. And some of them are dumb and some of them are brilliant. So that really was a lesson, I think, I learned during that time of you got to love problems, and you better solve problems in the context of the larger institution. So if you've got a problem in your department, if you can, and you can solve it on your own, you don't need anybody else to fix it. It's your responsibility. But it requires the organization to respond and maybe change. Then you need to craft that solution, how it benefits the institution. And once you start getting that kind of thinking, then the world changes. And now that's when you start becoming a real leader of an organization. When you start solving problems that benefit the whole organization. And I tell people that over again. That's an important lesson to keep in mind is love problems. Better love them. Because that's all you're going to hear. People don't stop in your office to tell you how wonderful you are. If they do, be suspicious. They stop in to give you a problem. They want you to help them fix it. You tell them, bring me a solution. Think of it, that solution, in the context of how does it improve the whole organization? And then suddenly you're thinking differently. And you're thinking like a leader. And that's been a success. I think that's been important. And it's also the way you are training other leaders around you to be better leaders themselves. A lot of people just don't get it. They don't recognize that's the better way to get your problem solved is solve them for the whole. So those are good experiences there. I can go on and on about these kind of things, but it's really been fun in that sense of you continue to learn as you go, and then you try to teach and pass it on. The big opportunity came for me career-wise was when the Emory job opened up. And most people say, well, why would you, Johns Hopkins, Emory? Well, Johns Hopkins, you're the dean of a medical school. I did that for 6 years. I revamped the curriculum. We opened a new research building, opened a new ambulatory care building. One of my passions was that, and that was one of my assignments from the prior dean is build that building. I had to figure out how to pay for it too. That's another thing you learn on the go is I can dream up anything, but you actually have to pay for things. Then I had to figure out how I'm going to get people to pay rent to use it and get everybody on board. Creating consensus is a big part of these jobs as well. How do you get people on board with a direction? And so that's another thing I learned during my deanship was that you got to have a vision of where you're trying to go. Where is the place going? Where are you trying to take it? Not you, but where are we going to go? And people think a vision is some lofty statement that has no end results. They're talking about a mission. They don't understand the difference between mission and vision. A vision is where are we going to be in 3 to 5 years. A mission is something that's strong and lasting and hopefully will be there forever. That we're going to do research to improve the health of humanity. That's, a mission. And, we usually write that out in about, 1,000 words and nobody can remember it. But a vision should be something that's pithy, concise, and is a statement of where we're going to be and where we're going to go. And I believe that having an inspiring, compelling vision is how you change culture. You don't change culture by saying to people, we got to change our culture. Well, to what? We like our culture. That's, this culture eats strategy for lunch. That's just stupid. If you don't do things, nothing changes. Culture without strategy does what? You hope something will happen right. But if you want to change a culture, articulate that vision where we got to go. It's got to be compelling and have a strategy that'll make it happen and a plan to implement the strategy. And if you put that all together, the culture will be matched up with the vision, whatever that means. But people use a lot of adjectives. We're going to be honest and fair and respectful. And it's sort of like, yeah, my mama told me that when I was 6, because if I didn't, she'd kick my butt. But how does that change this organization? What is it we want to achieve? Is it not going to be a bunch of nice folks? Great. But that's not going to make us great. It's going to make us a nice place. And if that satisfies you as a leader, God bless you, enjoy it, and hope that everybody else around you is smarter and can get something done without you. That's another thing in a leader is you've got to be able to make decisions. So I say to people, you got to listen and learn, and you got to decide and act. 4 things. Listen, learn, decide, act. But it's not listen, and maybe I'll decide some year. That doesn't work. You have to have some judgment. So listen, learn, because we always are learning, hear from other people, and then decide. And then action becomes important. And if it doesn't go right, correction. Correct the steps, redirect, keep us on path. I think that's another important thing for a leader is that sort of listen, learn, decide, act. Do not pretend you're the smartest man in the room. And when you're at Johns Hopkins and you're the dean, you're surrounded by everybody who's really smart. And my assumption is get in a room, always assume you're the stupid one. You're the doofus in the room. Everybody else is smarter. That really resonates with everybody else. And many of them are smarter. Some of them are actually more intelligent, but not smart at all. There's a difference between intelligence and being smart. That's the practical side of life. And that's another thing I like to say is God's greatest gift to mankind is common sense. If you don't have it, be a follower, please. Do not try to leave. And it's amazing how many people have a common sense deficit. This is a coat jacket. What's this? I don't know. What is that? Is that an arm? No, it's a coat jacket, right? And, come on. That's common sense. That's another side of life that I try to pass on to people. I tell people when I came to Emory, the attraction at Emory was I was looking at the world outside now. I've been 6 years as a dean of medicine. We've changed the curriculum, well recognized, going well. Both my children graduate from medical school there. I get to hand them the diploma, which was really a blast. And neither of whom told me they're going to be a doctor, but ultimately changed their mind and went to Hopkins for medicine. That was wonderful. And then I get this opportunity to come to Emory. What was attractive is Emory had things totally integrated. The clinical business, the doctor business, the hospital business, doctor business, had the medical school, public health and nursing, and a primate center. And they're all under one organizational structure. And it struck me how much more you could accomplish if you bring nursing, medicine, the health professions together. You apply public health principles, you bring science into it, and you have a clinical delivery system. What a great way to do things. And it was in a good city. Here my analysis was, here's Atlanta, a city that's growing rapidly. It's not shrinking like many other cities in the country were in 1996, getting smaller. You saw The corporate world was, merging and consolidating. Cities were becoming branch office towns, not headquarter towns. And Atlanta was going a different direction. And you looked and saw, this is an exciting place. The Olympics were just coming to town. The place was on the map. I saw this and said, this is going to be the capital of the South. Of course, we're in a battle, I guess, with Houston and Dallas and whoever else. But it was a great opportunity, I thought, of a great institution, a really solid institution that wasn't up to the Hopkins standards by quite a bit, but was in a position to move up to that with good leadership, good people. So coming down here was really exciting in terms of that opportunity. I love the board members. They were so gracious and so enthusiastic. And so having, this gets back to who do you work for? The university president is my direct boss, but my board of directors, they're an important part of it. How much do they embrace the vision you have and the direction you want to go into? Can you get them to embrace it? Gosweta was on the board at the time, Koch chairman. He was a marvelous man with great insights. Jimmy Williams, who was the CEO of SunTrust, was remarkable. I learned so much from him. And of course, I now was in the South, which is a real transition from Michigan and even D.C. And suddenly you're in the South, and people say things a little differently in the South. It was kind of fun. People tell stories. So if you talk to somebody, I talked to Jimmy Williams about a problem, and rather than giving you an answer and asking for his advice, he'd give you a story. It took me a while to figure out that that was the answer. Not too long, but pretty quickly I realized, hold it, when he tells you a story, that's the answer. And I'd listen to the story and say, okay, now I get it. It was really remarkable, and that was so much, I think, a Southern style of storytelling and the way people communicate a little bit differently, but actually quite enjoyably. And those people, the Rollins family here were incredible. And Randall Rollins is one of these people who is like a genius. Whatever the problem is, he just gets it. You give him a problem, he gets right to the it. I like to say everything has an it. And some people get it, some people don't get it. Speaking of it, I never forget, I was on a plane coming back. This is where I learned about it. I was coming back on a plane from Cayman Island. We had our liability insurance company down there. And on the way back, I get in a seat. Next to me is this guy. And he sees me reading my medical books. And he leans over and says, I'm a doctor. And so anyhow, he's talking at me. And so finally I turn to the table and asked him what he did. And he said, I'm not very smart. So and he starts going on about his business successes. And he told me he had no education. But I loved it when he said, he said, I don't know. He said, people bring me things and I get it. He said, everything has an it, and I just get it. Whatever the it is, I get it really fast. And I listened to him talking, in his sort of kind of a simple way. I'm not very smart. I kind of have some education, but not much. But I just get it. Every deal has an it. And he was a business guy. And I started thinking about it. Do people get it? A lot of people don't get it. What's the it? Everything has an it. And so I like that. You got to get it, whatever it is. Every problem has an it. There's something around it that drives it. Why if somebody wants to get rid of something, why? What's the reason behind it? And it resonated with me because my favorite question has been why since I was a little kid. I like to ask why. It annoys some people, but actually you learn a lot. There's a difference between stupid and ignorant. And ignorant is the lack of information and knowledge. And if you ask why, that's how you begin to gain knowledge and information. And sometimes there may not be an answer. That was the fun part about what was attractive about research. You ask why, and when there's not an answer, you say, oh, that's cool. Maybe I can find the answer. Isn't that great? That's where discovery comes from. Not asking why and getting the answer. If the answer's already known, that's good. You learn something. But if you're going to do research, they already did that research, that over with. Find a hard question that nobody knows the answer to, and go find the answer. That applies to life as well in general, and to good leadership. One of the things that happened back in 92 was the Clintons got elected. Bill got elected to president, and they decided they're going to take on healthcare reform. And Hillary Clinton was going to be in charge of that, as you recall. And I remember thinking about changes that we were needing to make. I'd been the dean a couple of years. We were looking at education and how some things in graduate medical education might evolve and change. The number of doctors, whether too many, whether enough, et cetera. And another thing that changed some of my direction was I got a call, and I had put together a little report, but I got a call from Robert Pear, a New York Times reporter. Did a lot of health policy, health finance in the business section. And he, it was a Monday night, and he had asked, I guess he had, the week before, Hillary Clinton was asked by, I think, Stark, to leave behind a copy of the plan that they had. Nobody had seen the full plan. I heard about it over the weekend, and on Monday morning I called a lawyer friend of mine in D.C. and said, could you send me a copy of the plan? Which he said, oh, we don't have that plan, of course. But by 10 o'clock it was couriered there and I had it. So I was going through it, and I got some of my team together, and we were looking at things in it. And so that night I get this call from Robert Pear from the New York Times, and he said, Dean John said, what do you think of what's going on in the reform bill? I said, well, what part are you talking about? He said, well, I want to talk about medical education. You're a dean of a medical school. I said, okay. What part of the bill did you want to talk about? And I said, what page are you looking at? He said, you got a copy? I said, yeah. So we start going through this bill, and I'm giving him some perspectives, my just candid viewpoints. So that was Monday night. By Wednesday morning, my phone is ringing about 6 a.m. It was the news wanting to ask me a question. I hadn't seen any newspapers. And apparently it was in the front page of the New York Times. He had his article, and down below the fold, I had some quote from me about something with medical education I thought maybe needed some adjustment and how it could be misused. And so by the time I got to work that morning, I'd already had a call from Ira Magaziner, who was in fact sort of the chief planner with Hillary, saying would I call him back. So I called back, and of course you get the usual he'll call you back thing. And of course with 2 seconds he calls me back, and he said, I read what you said in the New York Times today. He said, I think you're correct. So would you rewrite that for me? And I'm sort of stunned, Okay, yeah, I'd be happy to rewrite it for you. You want me to? How do you want me to get it back to you? He said, well, here's my fax number. Just fax it back. So I get my team together, and we kind of go through the whole bill again. That part was on graduate medical education, so we actually basically rewrite it. We use the same font type, the same thing. Then we look at the organization of the bill, the way they have it organized, and we reorganize the flow. So we send them back. Here's a suggested, chapter organization, and here's the text for what we would do. So that was done by about 4 o'clock. We send that back to them, and it just fits right into their font size, so perfect. And and by the end of the day, I get another call from him saying, would you come to the White House on Saturday? We're going to invite a bunch of deans down here, and we want to hear their opinion. So suddenly they're realizing, they're sort of making profound changes in statements about things, and you got a bunch of deans who are going to be critical of this. That's not good. We better find out what they think. So it was great. We went down on a Saturday morning. They had, I think there might have been 9 or 10 of us from medical school deans around the country. Harvard, Yale, Penn, Duke, Hopkins, Florida, Cincinnati, Washington, Stanford. Anyhow, we're there. And we're having this great conversation with them. They obviously are really super intelligent people and have really studied healthcare, but they've not ever done it. They don't have the practical side. So we had a good conversation. In the end, they asked us if we would continue to respond and feed them, give them our feedback. And that was interesting. And we said, sure, we'd be happy to do that. And before we left, the dean of Harvard says, why don't we have Mike coordinate this because he's close to D.C. And of course, so I'm this kid. I was 48 when I was the dean of medicine, and most of the deans were probably 55 to 60. So I'm this baby, being told to do this, which is great. So we got it. So that was kind of fun. We got involved in a lot to do with rewriting parts of the health reform bill of the Clintons, and that got me involved in that kind of thinking and those kind of sort of the politics of healthcare to some extent, and seeing how that bill really kind of worked its way through and the complexity of it going through. and then what happened to it, and the lessons that could be learned from how do you engage a broader group of people before you take it and dump it on the Hill. I think that kind of an experience, sitting in the White House with a bunch of really brilliant deans and the leadership in the White House, what it did was it really made me think more about policy and how does policy influence what we do, and then how should we be influencing policy and helping to instruct policymakers. It sort of said you've got to become engaged. You can't just sit in your cocoon in your ivory tower and just do something and expect it's all going to just multiply out from there. And so trying to get out there on that penetrating point in policy, and writing up your ideas and putting them on paper, and trying to get out, and you got to get on the Hill. And I guess it's, I've watched how complicated that can be, of getting people to understand. These are intelligent people sitting there. They have ideological beliefs, and it's a problem for me because I don't just accept ideology. I accept facts. That's the why. So give me the facts, I'll look at them, and then I'll decide. Don't tell me this is the way it is because my ideology is that all people should do A, B, and C, or not do A, B, and C. I don't know. I can't say that. All people aren't the same. So I look at facts. So I'm sometimes a Republican, sometimes a Democrat. Depends on what the issue is. I got to look at the issue, right? Don't you? You mean you decide without really understanding the issue because you feel this way? Give me a break. I can't do that. I don't feel like making the incision that way today. I think I'll make it this way. Oh, great. Looks ugly. Yeah, but it feels like fun. I just did it different. Well, that doesn't make any sense. What's the best? And of course, then we argue about the best, and that does have some philosophical sides of what is best for a country and a nation and whatnot. Very complicated, but yeah, it does. It did start to gel the importance of that, and then I became much more involved. Pulling together teams of academic leaders. We did it again in 2008. Pulled together the dean at Hopkins said, "Mike, why don't you pull together that group that you had, and let's do that again." And so we did, and so we got about 8 or 10 academic health center leaders, and we started focusing on the ACA, and before it was written, and trying to give input and guidance to what we thought was important from our perspective. And it's sort of like an obligation. You can say, well, it's extra work, I don't want to do it. Let Mikey do it. So Mikey does it. Yeah, that's fun. So I got that experience. By then I was involved in the Institute of Medicine, National Academy of Sciences, and on committees there and doing some Hill work, learned how to go down and express our opinions. So I grew with that as well. So that became part of it. The other part of the role there was our international programs and building international relationships in the University of Hong Kong, in China, in Singapore. And so we started developing more international outreach at the time. And that was fascinating, learning about these countries and what they were doing in science and healthcare. This is a long way from, Yosemite and Detroit, where I grew up, not knowing there were countries by those names. Well, I guess I might have known that, but so the whole Hopkins experience was really mind-blowing and great. Terrific trustees, brilliant people like Mike Bloomberg around and Morris Offit, and there were New Yorkers who were making a difference in their worlds big time. Mike Armstrong from IBM and later GM Hughes and AT&T, and these people, you could really talk to them. It was sort of transforming my life and my experiences, realizing how much bigger the world is than just in medicine, and how so much more impacts what we do than what we do ourselves. When you start, what we do in the care of a patient is us, between that patient, the doctor, the nurses. But when it comes to policy or healthcare or education, it's a much larger world, and you've got to live in that world if you're going to be a leader. And you need to lead in that world as well. So you've got to be a thought leader. You've got to think creatively and look at how do we, in fact, enhance and improve not only what you own and have to operate, but the state of those affairs in this country and internationally as well. So Hopkins was a great growing experience for 6 years there, 48 to 54 in my life, something I'd never anticipated. You know, if people said, well, did you always want to be a dean? I say, you know, at Gunga Dean? I mean, you know, what's a dean? You know, and, I mean, I didn't know much about that. And then to end up being one is sort of scary, but it was a fabulous experience, you know, of life. And Hopkins is such a remarkable place with remarkable people in it. And you could go on forever about that. From, you know, the dean who hired me, who was, you know, just an amazing guy, a real steward of what the mission was and a champion for that. Anyhow, so I ended up at Emory and I started into that conversation. Well, what I learned after a while, thinking about, okay, what is my job? I have 3 deans, the director of a primate center. I've got a few hospitals. I got a large physician practice organization. And I got people who run all those, and they got people who run various parts of that. What is my job? So my job, in the end, as you think it through, is, well, I've got to lead. And I have to hold people accountable for making things happen. What are those things going to happen? Well, you have to have a vision of where you want to go. Otherwise, you wobble around. It has to be compelling. It has to be inspiring. So part of the job is a vision and to inspire. Second, you really have to drive a strategy. And a lot of people think the strategy is they dream up this thing and they're going to do it. They tell everybody else this is what we're going to do. My view is you got to win people over, particularly when you're changing. How do you engage a lot of people in a process so in the end they actually own the strategy, not you? They help to create that strategy. Learning how to really do a strategic planning process. Then what does it take to implement it? You know, what is the specific plans of implementing? So we know what the strategic initiatives are. How do you make that happen? You've got to have a specific plan. And then what are the resources needed to make that happen? You start putting that together, and it's broadly understood and known. People critique it or support it, and in the end, you've got a plan. So now you've got sort of that roadmap you're driving things by, and yes, you will adjust and change. The other piece of it was you got to have a group, sort of a super committee, that's going to monitor the progress and make sure that progress is moving forward. You can't be a czar. You can try if you like, but that doesn't work. You know, you're going to lead by inspiration, not by intimidation. And so being able to put in place a plan like that here in Atlanta at Emory University and then to start seeing the results. So then I learned also then that, you know, you've got people who are your direct reports. And they have to be accountable for what they're going to do. So the other thing I learned that I like is that you ask them to give you the top 6 or 7 things that they're going to accomplish in this next year. And then you discuss it with them, you agree or don't agree, and you modify and adjust them. And then they've got their objectives for the year, the core objectives. And they're in keeping with the plan and everything else. They have other things they're going to do too, of course, but you know, we're talking at the high level. And then your job is to hold them accountable for that. And it's pretty easy to get people to create objectives. The harder part for a leader is actually hold people accountable. A lot of these people become your friends. And you know, when they fail, you can't just say, oh, well, they're my buddy, you know, they screwed up, so let it go. I mean, the hardest part is when somebody stops consistently hitting their targets that they agree to, or that they don't come back and say, look, we can't hit this is why, and we're going to have to adjust downward. And you say, yeah, we'd better adjust downward, adjust the course. That's good. You agreed to that. Of course, for them to not hit a target and not tell you, gone, you know, they're not playing in the team. But I think the hardest part is the gone. And you got to sever people from their leadership positions and move on because the leadership needs to change. And that to me is maybe the most gut-wrenching part of the job, coming to that decision, because you get to know people. And, you know, I like the people that I work with in general. None of them are evil. I mean, if they're evil, we would have put them in jail a long time ago. So some of them are, and they're usually highly competent to get that high. But on the other hand, you know, there are things you miss, and sometimes they can't get the job done, and you've got to get somebody who can. And that's, I think, one of the hard jobs of being, you know, the leader, is making that decision to do the cut and make a change in leadership at different levels. And it's not enjoyable, no matter how you do it. I mean, when it's over with, you know, you hope that things move on right and you can keep a good relationship with that person to the best you can. Some of them will be angry, but hopefully not. and hopefully it won't last. But that's a responsibility of leadership. And if you don't feel like you want to ever do that, then don't do that job. And that's the other part is I think people need to realize what is the job more than just the numbers that they're going to hit. What's the rest of the responsibility they have in these leadership positions? And that they've got the courage to execute on that when they have to make a change or do what's called, the hard thing. And the hard things are that type of thing, are the emotional things. Another piece of a good leader, I think, is, I tell people, is, you look out at what's going on in the world, in your world. That's usually not one thing. It's multiple things that are happening at the same time. A good leader integrates all that and says, this is happening here, that's happening here, and here. That means we got to go there. So you have all these directions, but when you put them all together, it gives you a point of focus that you've got to move to. I think some people are better than that than others. Some people naturally seem to integrate what's going on around them and find the solution that brings it to the right point and moves the organization forward. Some people, all they can see is the dot. They only see the trees and never see a forest. We talk about got to see the forest from the trees. I think they're both important. But if you're in a forest and all you see is a tree, you're missing a lot in the business world or in the health world or in the research world, because it's all moving. And trying to know what direction it's going to be and where it's going, it's knowing where the future is going to be before it happens, and then trying to get there first. And I think that's another trait that you see in good leaders is they kind of just get it again, and they're constantly processing what's happening, what people are saying around them, and when they put it all together, it means something. And that's where you go. So that's a lot of the story. I like to tell people, look, you don't have to be Einstein. You have to be smart enough for the job. But you got to be smart enough for the job. And smart is IQ and it's EQ. They have to combine. High IQ, low EQ, disaster. High EQ and no IQ, that would be a disaster too. Generally, I think high EQ generally doesn't get into these positions, although occasionally you see some people who are particularly good on their feet. And the one kind of personality disorder I kind of have learned to watch out for are the narcissistic sociopaths, because they are really unique people. And I've run across a few of them in my career, and generally they're scary. I've learned to see them better. I remember asking a psychiatrist, well, how do you guys treat that? And he just looked at me and said, you can't. And this is a respected person. I said, wow, what do you do? It's a big workaround. It's hard. And you realize, oh my gosh, when you have somebody, if they're on your leadership team, you got a problem. So recognizing that personality disorder, and you have all these personalities and trying to manage them. So that's another thing that I learned. You have to know yourself pretty well. And as you can tell from this interview, I talk too much, and I've known that forever. Remember the fellow who told me it's not where you work, it's who you work for. He said, Mike, you talk too much. You're not going to amount to anything. And he was right, I talked too much, but I amounted to something anyhow. But managing that. Now, what's interesting, in a situation like this, I'll talk. But you put me in a room at the National Academy of Sciences with a committee, and that's not what I do. So it's, if I'm just going to chat, I'll chat. But if I'm leading something, I'm listening. I'm absorbing as much as I can. I'm assuming that I'm surrounded by people who are smart and smarter than I am, and we'll get all that knowledge together on the table. So managing personalities is important. So one of the things that I found useful during my time at Emory was we created a leadership academy, and we decided that part of the leadership academy is we better know who we are. So, I had done some personality profiles when I became a dean, and they were kind of interesting, but we used what was called the Berkman personality profile. And it was great. So I participated in it. In our leadership academy that we started, everybody had one of these, and then we had a discussion by the folks who administer the test, telling us what the different colors meant, and because we put ourselves in, broke the fellows out into subgroups. And of course, the value was to learn who you are and who other people are, and what are the differences in people. And of course, I found out that one of my traits is I'm a doer. It's get it done now, and that's a red color they give assigned to that. And I was a very long red. And my CFO has I think it was yellow. I can't remember the colors on this one, but he's process oriented. So he loves process. And I liked working with him because he was very thorough and good. But we'd have these meetings and it'd kind of drive me nuts because he'd come in and he'd sort of have a 5-page document and it'd be numbered 1 to a jillion, and he'd say, this is the problem, and he'd want to walk me through the entire process of how he got to the conclusion. Well, once I realized my personality and his personality, and I laughed when we started talking about it, I said, here's the deal. I said, Ronnie, I said, you're terrific at what you do. You're different than I am. And you know that, obviously. I probably drive you nuts. I said, and so when you give me a list of your problem and the 150 steps you took to carefully rationalize your way through to the solution, let's do this. You tell me the problem and then tell me your solution. If I like your solution, then you can walk me through all 150 steps how you got there. If I don't like your solution, I'll tell you that, then you can go back and dream up another bunch of steps. And we all laughed, but it was true. I realized after doing that, people want to walk you through the painstaking steps they got to get to that conclusion because they love the process. Could drive me nuts. Tell me the answer. If it makes sense, we'll do it. So I'm more intuitive in a way than some of the others. There are communicators, but this was a very helpful thing. So then we the whole leadership team did it, and we have leadership retreats, which I found very valuable. Take your top team away. But one of the things I found in doing this is that, I started it at Hopkins too, is that you're going to have a retreat on a topic or topics. You invite your leadership team. It may be 15, it may be 20 people. I always bring the families. I try to have the workload be, 8 to 2. From 2 to 6, people are free to do things. Go play golf, ride a horse, do family things, but have them interacting. Then we come back, and my wife is great, Trina's great about this stuff. She'd plan out the dinners, of course she does all the menu. And then she'd always have some kind of entertainment at night. It may be a poetry. It may be a couple people doing a play. It was, one time it was Texas Hold'em. And it was fun, because then everybody's out there together, doing things together, chatting. So you kind of create a family of your leadership team. So they get to know each other, they get to know their spouse, they even get to know their children. And so that breaks down a lot of other barriers too, of, okay, I'm not out to stab anybody in the back here. I got to know these people. They're good folks. We all have to perform. If we don't, that's a problem, because Mike's already explained that one in his reviews. You got your objectives, you better hit them. Everybody gets that. But now, how do we work together? How do we really get the marginal benefit that comes from group thinking where it's useful? And I think it's another piece, is you got to build team, the sense of team, and how you do that. And then below that, you want those people to build their teams. And so it's part of it. It costs a little bit of money to do that, but it's, that's peanuts in the big sense of what you're trying to do as a leader. So clear vision, inspiring, strategy, implementation, accountability, and fiduciary responsibility. So I said, I got an easy job. And my job is, I don't actually manage anything on a day-to-day basis as the executive vice president. Because somebody's got the hospitals, he oversees them, he's got people running the hospitals down, it goes all the way down. The medical school, the public health school, the nursing school's got deans, etc. So I'm this troublemaker who sits up here with a big vision, dreaming up big dreams, going out and hustling, trying to make national, international change, driving the force here. And I always tell my team, look, my great day is I come to work and do nothing and you're doing everything. Then I'm successful. You're successful. Now the bad news is I never come to work without another idea for us to do, so I'll probably drive you nuts. But I'm not going to do your job for you. You're going to do your job. If I have to do your job, then I will take a demotion, fire you, and I'll come down. They can fire somebody to do my job. So once you make those things clear with people, I think you really develop a relationship that's important, and one that's has open communication and freedom to tell you, I think you're wrong, Mike. That's okay. If I knew everything, I would be a deity, and that'd be great, but I don't. And so I think you want to have people be able to tell you you're wrong. It gets back to listen and learn. And you're always learning, always learning. I mean, I've learned all my financial and accounting stuff by on-the-job training. People, finance people coming in and explaining to me how to read a spreadsheet, and look to the lower right corner first. You know what I mean by that. And so, a lot of this is on-the-job training you get in life, because that's the way life is. So you've got expertise around you, take advantage of it and use it. And it's been a fun trip. So part of it is this, that's the direct response. But then the other part is relationships with the outside world and relationships outside your organization. If you're going to do an acquisition of another group or a hospital or something, part of the relationship building is just as important as the deal and the details of that deal. And being able to go out and participate in a way that's meaningful. Building the national presence. It gets back to what Bob Cantrell taught me, is you got all your people, you want them to all be leaders of every organization in the country at the same time. Not going to happen, but that's what you're pushing your people and promoting them to be nationally visible, because if they're nationally visible, the institution is nationally visible. And then making a difference nationally and internationally. When I see great ideas coming from, the Department of Surgery that says, we're going to create a division of global surgery. So what do you mean? Well, we have some of our doctors who really want to go and do a version of missionary work and education as well as care in Ethiopia. So really? And they tell me what they're doing, and they have one of their residents who had already spent a year. And it's brilliant. Who else does this? And we're going to train these young doctors in these, second, third worlds how to be better at what they do. And you learn things. I didn't know at that time in Africa, trauma was the number one cause of death. I thought, well, you think of HIV and all the rest of it. Well, you start thinking about how easy it is for somebody to get killed in an accident there. And then, so trauma surgery was really important. Whether that's a true number or not, that's what they told me. Sounded good, so I believed it. But it was really more about that mission of how do we extend ourselves. We're going to do a clean water program in third worlds. So now we got Emory people out in third worlds making a difference. And, you look back, and I look back and say, wow, some of the great things that have happened at Emory have been, 2 drugs that treat HIV, making a difference in tens of millions of lives. Where it was fatal, it's now turned into a chronic disease. Hepatitis C drug. Dr. Shinazi, brilliant guy, was involved in the HIV. He does the Hep C too. How could a guy be involved in 3 world-class breakthroughs like that? It's amazing. What a brain. It's just remarkable. But then Emory is now making this international difference as well. Our caring for those Ebola patients and the bravery of our physicians and staff to do something like that when the world really just didn't know what to do, and people are dying so frequently, and it's so contagious. And we did it so well. And I jokingly tell people that's when everybody in the world started to know Emory is here in Atlanta, and it's spelled E-M-O-R-Y, not E-M-E-R-Y. And that's the kind of thing, those are the kind of things that bring national attention to what we do, staying on that, what I call the penetrating point of the cutting edge. So maybe that's beginning to get to a good place to close. When I was at Hopkins, I discovered the penetrating point of the cutting edge. And somebody mentioned it to me in some casual way. And I was thinking, well, what does that mean? The penetrating point of the cutting edge. Why not just the cutting edge? And then I thought to myself, okay, so what's the cutting edge? Cutting edge is something new. Something new has been invented, discovered, whatever, and we are amongst the first to do it. So there's a new technology, a new technique, a new drug, and we get to be the first to apply it. Somebody else invented it, we get to apply it. The penetrating point is when we discover it and other people follow us. That's when you are at the top of the game, when you're on the penetrating point of the cutting edge. And to me, that's something that I've preached at Emory for my 20 years now is that we've got to be on the penetrating point of the cutting edge. This is our century to make a difference. We're in the right place at the right time, in the right environment. And, sitting next to the CDC and other things here in town is just all opportunity. And so the more that we can do, so an HIV drug that makes a difference, that's the penetrating point of the cutting edge. And so, it's a way of thinking. And then how do we, encourage that kind of creativity in our people, taking the risk, and hopefully, if you do that, if you have that, hit that penetrating point, every now and then, every few years, wow, you're really making a difference in millions of lives. So it's, we take care of people in our clinics and our hospitals one by one. But in our science, we are affecting people by the tens, the hundreds, the thousands, and the millions. And that's what sort of has driven me, is that opportunity to understand, to answer the question why, to make a difference for the N of one, the individual, but for large populations. And I think that's sort of applicable in life to probably anything we do. How do you think that way? And depending where you are in the organization, your focus may be in one part of that, but you own the whole because you're a part of that organization. I need to be proud of it. And then, of course, how do we communicate that well? So it's a challenging but fun and exciting world. It has its swings, its ups and downs. You succeed, you fail, you bounce back, you listen, you learn, you decide, you act, and then you react and change again because you listened again, and where you're going, you alter the course because the winds changed, the sun didn't shine, whatever. It's exciting. Life is exciting in many ways. And, I can say that I've been blessed in that, I'm not generally affected by depression or any of those. I may be a little crazy and a little hyperactive and all that, but that's been managed more or less. So it's a great life, and you learn a lot going through it. And I think the excitement is having that enthusiasm for what you do and let it show. Work hard at it. Be creative as you can be. Look for that opportunity to make a difference. Ask the question why. Get it. Listen, learn, decide, act. That's really important. We'll close that back as when I was a resident in ENT. A lot of what we did was visual. We used to wear head mirrors, but now we use all kinds of scopes. And used to have students, medical students would come in. And they would go see the patient in the clinic, and then they'd come back in to see me as the attending doctor or the chief resident. And I'd say, well, what did you see? Tell me about the patient. And they'd tell you why the patient was there and what their problem was, and go through all that. I'd say, well, and tell me about the physical examination. And they would start to describe, let's say they came in and they had a hearing loss, and it was acute and whatever. And I would say after they do that, they do the exam, they tell me what they saw, the whole examination. And I would say to a simple question, this would be back in the 70s. Did they have tonsils? It was a dumb question, right, because it was irrelevant. Did they have tonsils? And so often they would say, I can't say. I said, well, did you look? Oh, absolutely I looked. Ah, so you looked but didn't see. So now go back and see. And then they would come back and say, yeah, no, they had their tonsils taken out when they were 6. And it was interesting how this lesson of look, see. But then you have to know what you see and understand what it means. And I used that way back as a resident, and I think it applies to leadership as well in a way. It's that listen, learn, act, do, look, see, know, understand. There's a lot of that in, lessons from that you can take in life too and combine those things. So anyhow, you learn a lot from your mom and your dad, from hanging out with 4 other kids, fighting over games and food and whatever else, playing on the streets with kids in a neighborhood, sports. You learn from, jobs you get, whether menial jobs like sweeping floors, delivering newspapers, bagging groceries. I've done all those things. It's just, you learn from all that. And it all adds up. It summates in a way in your life, if you're lucky. And it means something. And of course, hard work is just a driver. It's a requirement. It's not an option. And I think I've told the story now. And you too can learn, do all this yourself and enjoy. But you don't just get assigned it. It's not uncommon. Have a student come up and say, how do I get to do what you do? And say, well, maybe the first thing I do is become a professor. You want to do what I do? Be executive vice president for health affairs in the university? Well, you got to become a professor. I don't want to do that. Well, then you won't be this. Why? You have to explain to them. And it's kind of interesting how people they want to go to be the boss right away. How do I skip everything in between? Well, life doesn't work that way. It's a series of steps. We go all the way through, and then we move on to the world on the outside, wherever that is. So that's a story.